When you hear the word landform, chances are you think of something along the lines of a mountain, an island, or a plain. These sorts of things are extremely common, and chances are you see at least some of them every day. But what if I told you there are some landforms that are far more stunning and unique than these boring ones? In fact, not only can they be visually impressive, the ways that they can form are often extremely unorthodox and don't generally happen under normal circumstances. Now, before we get into interesting rocks, I'd appreciate if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Okay, so to begin with, let's dive into a cave. Specifically, we want to look at stalactites and stalagmites, which are essentially gigantic spikes that form deep inside a cavern, either hanging down from the ceiling or protruding upward from the ground, respectively. These spikes add flair to what would otherwise be a cold, dark, and lonely cave, and they can be pretty unexpected for anyone unaware of their existence. But how exactly do they form? Well, the easiest way to think about it is to think about icicles, which are essentially ice stalactites that form on buildings. Icicles form when it gets warm enough for snow and ice to melt a little bit during the day, but not so much that it all disappears, and it has to get cold enough at night for the water to quickly refreeze. What will happen is that the slowly melting ice will drip and trickle downwards, and then it freezes lower down. As time goes on, the icicle slowly thickens and lengthens, and the process will continue until someone knocks it off or it gets too warm and it falls to the ground, hopefully without impaling anything in the process. Stalactites form in a somewhat similar manner, though the process takes significantly longer. Essentially, water can combine with carbon dioxide at the surface to form carbonic acid, which sinks down through the ground, accumulating small amounts of calcium carbonate until it reaches a cavern. When said acid hits the open air of a cave, it loses the dissolved carbon dioxide, causing the calcium carbonate to drip and solidify downwards. Stalactites form when it hardens before it can drip down to the ground, while stalagmites form when it drifts all the way to the ground and begins to pile up from there. Because the amounts of calcium carbonate being dissolved are so small, it takes an extremely long time for these spikes to form, generally on the order of thousands or even tens of thousands of years. Some of the biggest stalactites that have ever been seen in caves are up to 30 feet or 10 meters long, which is about the same as a three-story building. In general, the presence of one of these spikes in caves helps to create an extremely alien landscape, one that you would never find on the surface. Okay, so underground spikes formed by the slow dripping of water and minerals are insane enough. But what about gigantic, flooded valleys that are formed by thousands of years of glacier movement and melting? Well, this is when you get a fjord, which are generally found in the high Arctic and Antarctic regions of the planet. Norway, in particular, is world renowned for its thousands of deep, spectacular fjords, but they can also be found in places like Greenland, Alaska, southern Argentina, and Antarctica. Fun fact, the word fjord itself is basically an English word that was stolen from Norwegian, and thus is one of the only English words to be spelled the way it is. In order to create a fjord, you need a glacier that is deep and fast enough to weather away at the surrounding terrain. Over the span of thousands of years, the valley that the glacier carves out gets deeper and deeper, eventually to the point where the bottom of the valley that it created is lower than the nearby ocean. Once temperatures rise and the glacier melts away, water quickly floods into the inlet, in some cases reaching hundreds of miles inland from the main ocean. The end result is a striking landscape with gigantic mountains plunging into the ocean, creating a gap that may in some cases be less than a mile wide. It is worth mentioning that in order for it to be an actual fjord, it needs to be formed by a glacier, or else you get something different. Therefore, you can get scenery that looks like a fjord but isn't actually a fjord, which is the case in many places nearer to the equator. Another interesting tidbit, the reason why Norway specifically has so many fjords has to do with the last ice age. As recently as 10,000 years ago, massive ice sheets extended all the way down to the mid latitudes in many places, including Norway. In addition, Norway is unique in just how mountainous its terrain is near the coast, which, when combined with just how much time glaciers have existed in the region, has helped to create the staggering number of fjords the country has, with over 1,000 that are significant enough to get their own name. Okay, to finish off the video, let's go to the American Southwest, which is home to several national parks and monuments where the landforms within them are the primary attraction. Each national park has something unique, with Bryce Canyon home to spectacular rock formations known as hoodoos, a region known as Monument Valley home to iconic buttes and plateaus that are straight out of the Wild West, and Arches National Park being home to, well, rock arches. Each of these rock formations has their own unique and interesting origin story. The hoods of Bryce Canyon may look a lot like the aforementioned stalagmites, but instead of them being formed by tripping minerals, they are formed when soft rock around them is eroded away, leaving tall, thin spires of harder, more resistant rock behind. The mesas in Monument Valley got their start hundreds of millions of years ago, when the region was underwater. During this time period, layers upon layers of rock and sediment piled up, and eventually tectonic movement lifted them into the high desert landscape as we see them now. The landscape in the Arches region got a relatively similar start, but here, cracks formed in the rock in just the right way to allow pieces of rock to break off, which over time created the distinctive arches. One thing that you may notice about all of these areas, however, is that the rock itself is a reddish-orange color. This comes from iron oxide that is in the soil. You might know of iron oxide as the compound that causes rust, and here what's happening isn't terribly different. Iron that is in the soil comes into contact with the atmosphere in some way or another, creating iron oxide and giving off that reddish hue. The American Southwest in general is a remote, desolate, and rugged landscape full of unique features, with some parts of it being coined as the closest Earth gets to Mars. If being compared to a whole different planet doesn't say something, then I don't know what does. And that's all I have to say about interesting landforms. As always, I'd appreciate if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Thanks and have a great day.